So coming here, I was so concerned that we were going to be between you and leaving. I said, oh, there'll be like 5 people here. And then we hear we're between you and wine. So now it's like way worse. So thank you for sticking around.
Yes, really, thank you for, but we're only have 20 minutes. So actually we will hop right in because there are only 20 minutes between us and wine, or you and wine. So I guess my first question is, I'd imagine that managing a healthcare workforce looks pretty different pre-pandemic, post-pandemic. What's the thing that's maybe surprised you most or maybe challenged you most in kind of this new and quite different era?
Yeah. In healthcare, and for anyone who works in healthcare, you're always preparing for crisis, from the snowstorm to, there was the Ebola scare years ago. So we always had, I see some nodding. So we've always been prepping on some scale for it. But, the COVID was beyond what anyone could have imagined. And so you've probably heard a little bit, Northwell did treat kind of the most folks around this, just given our size and what we were expected to do from the state, even nationally, to support, to help. I think for our workforce, one, coming out of it, certainly the stress, the fatigue, and we did a whole lot. I was sharing with you, you try not to honestly think about that period of time because it was so traumatic. But yesterday, our CEO and I, we were at a conference and the question came up and you had to reflect. And I was forgetting that we had decided to continue to pay people and all sorts of things. So it brought back a lot of memories. But what was interesting, and many of you in the room have dealt with this, was kind of if you had a workforce that wasn't remote in mass, it was kind of as the acute part of the pandemic was winding down, what was going to happen, right? Were we going to just return everyone back to work? And then you saw kind of the generational differences around that. And what's the guidance as an HR leader you're giving to folks, right? And so one of the first things we thought about was inflation. We thought about the economy. And we challenged some of our folks who wanted to see everyone get back to work, and saying, hey, do you understand right now the cost of transportation? Do you understand that some people are still dealing with childcare issues, elder care issues, et cetera? So are you prepared to deal with that? And if you're not prepared to deal with that, I don't think we force it. And we were giving guidance to other organizations as well. At the same time, being concerned as a well-being organization, are you going to have people at home staring at a screen for hours, not getting up? And is that healthy? And what about the folks who don't have social networks? The Surgeon General put out a warning recently about loneliness in this country. What about that? And is that truly living in health? Is that going to promote well-being? And so you're conflicted around it. And I think trying to calm the temperature, calm the pressure to say, let some of this happen organically. Don't push it yet, right? We're not that far away from the acute stage of this. Let's learn. And then what we start to do is we said, okay, it depends on the area of the business. So obviously we have a workforce, over 60% that's clinical. They have to be in person, right? And how we showed up for them needed to be a little bit different. But now we've got this remote workforce, and who, by the way, we've taken away some of their real estate because we converted some of our sites into kind of WeWork. Don't get me sued, we call it Workwell. Spaces where folks could come to collaborate, to work if they needed to get out of the house, because that's real too. And so if we returned everyone, we didn't even have space to return some of these folks, right? So we had to think about all that. And then what about the people who moved out of state? And some of the employment laws in some of these states, we were not ready to contend with. And we have team members in Florida, we have some global partnerships, national partnerships, but we were not at this scale. So the ability quickly to stand up a strategy to say, okay, what state is safe from an employment standpoint today? Where can we allow you to work? How do we deal with the denial? What are we going to pay you? Are we going to pay you New York? Are we going to pay you whatever the cost of living rate is where you're moving? So everything that you all had to contend with, we certainly were as well. And then, oh, by the way, the tension between those who have to come in person and those who get to, quote unquote, work at home. So shifting the messaging around, we have everything for you. If you do this type of work, if you want to be in person, if you thrive on that, we've got it. If you don't, we've got it, right? And then some sort of hybrid in between. So I think just the adjustment of it, the educating people and trying to calm the waters. If it were up to Michael Dowling, our CEO, some of you know him, everyone would be back tomorrow. And so navigating that's been fun too. I get an article on my desk every other week about this.
Oh my God. That's a tough spot to be in. I don't know who I picked there.
He interviewed the head of IBM recently at a thing in the city, and of course, he brought the topic up. So, no comment.
That's wild. So, sort of relatedly, and this is something that came up when we were speaking the other day, you all think about in trying to get people back to the office, or the people that have to work, obviously, in your clinics, that there's an issue of affordability. Basically, can they afford to pay the cost of living here in New York, that it's very expensive to work for you? Can you talk about that, the challenge there? Because it's not just training at some point, right? It's, hey, no matter how great you are at your job, if you can't pay the rent, you can't work for us.
Yeah, and this is, we've been trying to sound the alarm on this because I think there's so many grants out there now for healthcare workforce pipelines or any kind of industry. We partner with JP Morgan, we partner with a lot of organizations on this. We have 1 million pipeline pathway programs. We are opening a high school next year with New York City, the New York City Public Schools through a grant from Bloomberg. We have our own medical school, nursing school, any kind of school, you name it, our own corporate university. We have that all, and we train a whole lot. People are worried about future staffing shortages. We believe you can find untapped pools of talent out there. You just have to find them, understand the needs. 2 things we've been flagging, even to our corporate partners who want to do work with us on this, is we could stand up a pipeline program tomorrow, but a barrier to participation is that this individual has to leave their full-time employment to participate in this training program. They can't do that. So then how can they participate in the pipeline training program, right? So it's why we do a lot of things in-house so that we can meet that gap as well as train in our culture too, which we try to keep unique. So that's one part of it. How do you remove the barriers? The other thing is, and I think for many of the employers in the room, you're paying pretty good wages. But obviously inflation is settling a little bit, but the cost, just this region, you're probably seeing people relocating. You may operate obviously nationally, globally, but you're seeing people relocating. I'm gonna throw out some states, you'll nod. North Carolina, Florida, for some reason, no offense. Texas, Delaware, you're seeing these places and we totally get it. Cost of living, change in lifestyle, all of it. So whereas we're still paying a competitive wage, we're still seeing that struggle, even for 6-figure earners, to be able to afford. And if you have a family, So we have a number of things at Northwell, certainly from funds to support people when they're in crisis. It's being endowed, thankfully, so that's great. It'll be sustainable. And we get a lot of just our own people giving back. Michael Dowling, our CEO, will just write, here's $40,000 for it. Thank you, Michael, for giving us back your salary. We appreciate it. We have embedded a social worker within our employee and family assistance program. And what we did there was learn from our community relations team. And we tapped into the resource network they've developed to support our team members. We just opened a thrift store for our team members, as well as job candidates who may not have clothing for interviews. And so we're trying to do all of that, but at the same time, when we're in front of any elected official, this is what we're talking about, the affordability piece. And it's not just healthcare, it's police, it's fire, it's teachers. Any critical service in this region, if you want to keep them here, you have to think about affordability. And so we've put a plan together around points, childcare, tax credits, health, just all of these things that would be helpful to us who are trying to meet your care needs, right? And keep the workforce here. So we're really trying to go louder on that. I'm not worried about the staffing shortages so much. Tech is going to help there, the pipeline development, the training. It's the affordability piece.
Yeah. Well, I mean, do you feel like you have more of a voice to some extent, that maybe the lawmakers are hearing you a little bit better when you say, if I say, oh, childcare is nuts, or it's impossible to find housing.
Yeah.
Do you think that you all have a space to maybe make a little bit of headway to the extent that anything ever
a little
happens?
bit. And look, we're galvanizing. I'm talking with our government affairs people, and many of them are former elected officials. Our PR teams, we want to start writing opinion pieces. I have an op-ed in draft. I don't like it right now, so we're reworking it. We really want to go louder and use our platform for sure. And that's the most concerning part for sure.
I do want to ask about unions. Part of your workforce is unionized, part is not. And you have a lot of
Does anyone want to talk about unions?
Everybody, I know, HR, you guys want to talk unions, right? Obviously.
Yes.
But you have, I guess I'm curious how you think about managing your unions, and kind of, there can be some real tension there and animosity among workers who are unionized versus not, different separate unions. At my old job, we had 2 unions, and we spent a lot of time looking over and saying, like, hey, what are those guys getting, and why aren't we getting it?
Yeah.
How do you kind of manage that day to day?
Yeah, you heard reference to my prior career before coming to Northwell. It was labor. I was management side with the Mayor's Office of Labor Relations, and learned a whole lot, a good foundation to come into a Northwell Health. So today about 28% of our workforce is union represented. We've got over 30 labor contracts, so we're always negotiating. Certainly getting more media attention. Lenox Hill recently, the nurses union, you may have seen, they were outside practice picketing. We settled that contract yesterday morning, as we knew we would, but they have to do what they've got to do. We get it. So the dynamics are interesting. And when we grew through mergers and acquisition, so you're inheriting sometimes union, sometimes non-union, benefits plans, pay plans. So we've got tons of those too. We're about to bring in Northwell Health. That'll bring us over 100,000 folks. They've got a little bit more union presence than us, and that'll add to our percentage. So first is the relationships, because the reality is unions do have voice, they do have power. And you cannot burn bridges, and you cannot be entirely adversarial, because it's a long-term relationship. So we get that, and we get the political power. When we have to redevelop a building or open a new building, one of the first questions we're asked is, what does this union think about it? Right? And we try to educate our leaders on that balance of power so they understand it. And then, oh, by the way, they represent our team members. They do have a voice. So we have to have that relationship. At the same time, we're trying to educate them on the future. The world is changing. It's not the same way that the care models that we relied on in the past have to evolve. Tech is coming in faster than we could ever imagine. So we are trying to educate them about the future. Now come into the workforce, 10 plus unions, nurses that are not, and so forth. And so every negotiation, you have to be thinking about your non-union workforce. For those of you who have the presence, you have to be thinking about the negotiations that's coming down the line. What are you agreeing to here? What we've tried to do is evolve to a strategy where we look at it in markets. And we say to unions, yes, we saw this strikes, and I speak with my colleagues at Mount Sinai and Presby and Montefiore and all the other places. We saw those strikes. We saw what they got. We have had to give some of that because we have certain team members who have benefited from certain agreements, but don't assume that we have to, right? Number one. Number two, this is market. Manhattan's gonna look a little bit different than Peconic Bay on Long Island, than Westchester, right? So we've tried to change that game up a little bit, not rely on a pattern, and try to educate that we have to look at this as a market, number one. Number two, these are our team members. We're gonna treat them well. I don't need you yelling at me to convince me to treat them well. That's what we're known for doing. So be a partner, but don't be adversarial for no reason. Recruitment and retention is gonna keep us honest at the end of the day. So we try to signal that a whole lot. And then you're on the benefits and all that other stuff. Look, we try to look across the entire organization and determine how can we be fair. right? And what are the trade-offs, depending on the plan, the benefits plan, the play plan. But it's so complex for sure. It's fun. It's so much fun. keeps you on your toes.
So I hope this is maybe slightly more fun, but maybe not.
Please.
I obviously have to bring up AI, and a lot of companies say, it's going to automate tasks and we're going to have efficiencies. And from the worker standpoint, a lot of us sit back and say, well, I know what that means. My job's going away tomorrow. And I'm curious, in a setting where AI is going to change some people's jobs, how you think about telling people about that, because they are very afraid.
Yeah, and tech fears go back centuries, right? I was reading something with someone from Google once. There was an article and then a presentation, when the camera was invented, there were fears around the camera, right? And today it's on our phones. And so, the evolution of tech fears, one of the first things is for folks to understand they are interacting with AI every single day. They may not know it, but they already are. And I think that's the first part of the conversation. You don't even realize you're interacting with AI in every sense all the time. So that's the first thing. We have stood up at Northwell, we have an AI hub, an AI governance council, all of that. ChatGPT is allowed in our organization. We have our own in-house version that just went live. We have education being stood up around AI. In HR, we have introduced a digital assistant first as part of a broader HR transformation, and we've shown our 2-year roadmap. It's coming into comp, into benefits, into recruitment, into every area. We just have to automate. Certainly deep learning, machine learning, all of it. We have to, for efficiency's sake. And in our support centers too, we're bringing it in. So I think in our organization, HR actually led the way a little bit with the introduction of that digital assistant. It's answering inquiries, thousands a week. It's now doing transactions for folks. So easy, accessible. We're doing our own in-house apps for team members. They can generate things on their own, and there's a significant roadmap to keep building that. But really ease and convenience, getting people more comfortable. But look, I remember when we needed to tell people, we're no longer giving you a paper, engagement survey. You now have to do it online. There was uproar, right? And so you sort of get through that. And those who need a little bit more help from a digital literacy standpoint, you provide the support they need. But yeah, we're doing a lot. And then AI is used today in our imaging spaces, in many of our clinical spaces as well. We have robots. If you have had surgery recently, you may have had a robot assist the clinicians with that surgery, and in our pharmacies and more. So robots are there. You're smiling. It's what? Yes, we named them, all of it. And AI is certainly moving in fast, yeah.
Do you worry your ChatGPT makes stuff up? That was a story over the weekend. I don't know if I'm asking HR. How do you know it's saying the right thing?
I know. Well, they tell you, right, this little warning to double check. But I will say, and I think there might be some Northwell HR team members. There was this little video on social media recently, and I sent it out to mess with the team. And it's my favorite colleague is ChatGPT. And it's true. I use it personally, professionally. It's faster. Right? And you can say in this tone, in this style, make it more casual, make it more conversational. Written by Maxine, Carrington, Chief People Officer at Northwell. If I'm doing talking points for our CEO, by Michael Dowling, CEO of, and it's learning you and getting better, and it's just saved so much time. So we have to lean in and use it, but use it responsibly, of course. And you guys know the regulation now around bias and preventing just the risks that are associated, we have to be thinking about as well.
So something that is actually slightly more fun, I think. You all have moved
I didn't make that one fun, no.
That was, the robot was fun, honestly.
Okay.
But you've moved into entertainment as well with Northwell Studios. You've done some documentaries, Lenox Hill, Emergency NYC. I'm curious, what you're doing there, but also how you're talking to your workforce about this. They might be looking around and thinking, well, what is this?
I didn't get that raise, and they're doing documentaries, which we don't really pay for, by the way. But it's real, God forbid you have an event. It's how they do this event. No, I didn't get a raise, and you have to explain the difference. Anyway, so So how that started, we did a few things, and Michael has this big vision around the definition of health. It's beyond traditional healthcare. Number one, it's not the transaction of you're sick, you come in, or we operate on you. It's looking at communities and how we improve health, right? So we do a lot of work. We've adopted communities from Harlem and onto Long Island to Staten Island, et cetera. And how do we tell that story? The story of health, the story of healthcare. And certainly it helps. And by the way, we use all of it for our recruitment. It certainly helps. And there's pride in it. So it starts with before the pandemic, and I was actually the head of HR at Lenox Hill at the time. Dr. Langer, who's in the first Lenox Hill show, he has some friends who are filmmakers from Israel. And they get to talking about doing this documentary on neurosurgery, and then it grows to our emergency medicine space, which we had a few sites in Manhattan. And that's how it starts, and it starts with Lenox Hill. And it tells this powerful story. We didn't know a pandemic was coming. We didn't know George Floyd was coming, right? None of that as we start to film. But that gets wrapped in by the end. So that's the first one on Netflix. Does really well, wins some awards, telling the story, giving people insight. Then COVID. So first wave, which brings you inside one of our hospitals during the pandemic. That one is hard. Some of our team members, and you see them fighting for their lives, that one was hard. I was bawling when I got to preview it. And it hits at the time we're trying to get vaccines in arms. And you're like, how do people see this and not understand we're trying to save your life, And you had nurses not wanting to get vaxxed. And we had lost about 20 team members at that point. No offense if you don't want to get vaxxed, it's totally fine, as long as it's backed by science. That decision is backed by evidence and science. So we do first wave. Then folks want to follow up to Lenox. So Emergency NYC comes along. And then the latest is on our college program around behavioral health, because there is obviously a crisis globally around mental health, and it's happening on college campuses. So we're trying to shed light on that and what we've been doing in response. So all of that's growing, and it's how do we formalize this to better represent ourselves in these discussions, negotiations. And then we have the Northwell Nurse Choir, which makes it to America's Got Talent. They were nurses formed after the pandemic to bring joy and hope back and the pride in nursing, right? So they've performed at the White House. They're all over. We just had our annual talent show to audition people to join the Nurse Choir. It was pretty awesome at Carnegie Hall. It was pretty cool. So all of that coming together, really about telling the story and the power of storytelling, right? It's been really critical, yeah.
Well, I have
and they love it, and there's pride in it, for sure.
I mean, the choir thing sounds incredible. I saw someone react to yours, like, oh, maybe we'll Google that later. Well, we are out of time, but thank you so much.
Thank you. Enjoy the reception and the wine.
Reception, everybody.